Hey everybody, it's me, Angela. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm so excited you could join me for another Thursday. For those of you that were commenting on the chat, this is your first time making it live, I'm so glad you're here. And if you've stumbled across this, I'm basically every Thursday at 3 o'clock in Central Time. I come and hang out and talk about some kind of topic related to quilting and then answer questions live. It's just a way for me to connect, and it kind of came out of our free motion challenge quilting alongs that we do, but then it's kind of evolved into its own thing. So it's definitely fun to get on early and chat with everybody through text or typing, and then of course to talk about a topic. And of course we have giveaways and all sorts of fun stuff. So this week's topic is going to be just slightly different because we're going to be talking about the business of longarm or machine quilting. But for those of you that are like, no thanks, don't want to do that, hopefully it can just be an encouraging story about how even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes. When you hear about how this all came about from a person that failed the sewing machine test twice in home ec, true story, how I became from that person became known for machine quilting, it's kind of funny. And so hopefully, if nothing else, you'll be engaged in a funny story. But definitely a little bit different than what we normally talk about. Normally it's more practical related or technical related, but this one's just a little fun thing. But real quick, before we get into the story, I just want to let you know that the weekly winner for this last week's giveaway for the t-shirt, it's already been picked. It was Amy Osmondson. She's already been notified. She's super excited. And this week I'm giving away a Scraptastic pattern in a scrap bag. Now to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is after the video's over or the live chat, just click the description box below and there's a link and it takes you to a place where you can type in your name and email. Makes it super easy for me to pick who wins, and I'll announce the winner next week. So very fun. Really excited to tell you that I have next month's live chat scheduled. So usually I would just kind of pick one every week, but I realized that was getting hard for people to keep track of when to come in and when not to. So the next 4 weeks of live chats have been picked and figured out. So February 11th, I'll be going over tension troubleshooting. Any issues you're having with thread tension, needle problems, I'll give you some tips to look into that. I think that should be a really informative chat. I've had my share of tension issues, so I can definitely speak to that. The 18th of February, we'll be talking about swirls, how to get those round swirls, tips for making those designs look really nice. The 25th, I'll be talking about my favorite marking tools, my favorite ways that I have marked quilts in the past or that you might find marking a little easier. And then March 4th, I'll be talking about thread painting. Super excited about that one. I'll just show you some samples and talk about how you can, add a little bit more quilting on top of your quilting to give it even more of a cool look. So looking forward to all of those. And if you're not sure where to find them, they're always on my YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe. Or you can also find them on my website, Quilting is My Therapy. So I have them each listed as an event underneath, so you can find that as well. I hope you will consider joining me. But even if you can't make it live, you can definitely watch them after the fact because they stay on my YouTube channel afterwards. So if you can't make it live, some people work, totally understand, no worries. You can always catch them later. So hopefully you will do that. All right, without any further ado, I'll do my little presentation. Of course, I got my slideshow or my pictures to share, but I'll also try to look back at the chat and see if there's any live questions that come in. And if there is something I think that's pretty pertinent to what I'm talking about, I'll try to address it. But I also have a list of questions that people were asking beforehand that when we were chatting. So definitely fun stuff to go over. All right, so let's look at the slideshow. First of all, not related to the topic, if you haven't caught the first episode of the second season of Midnight Quilter that came out yesterday, it was the Scraptastic quilt. For those of you that don't know what Midnight Quilter is, it's a tutorial, fun video where I make a quilt start to finish, and it's supposed to be kind of entertaining and kind of informative, a little bit of both. So this was the quilt that we worked on yesterday, the Scraptastic quilt. Now this quilt's perfect because it can work with jelly roll strips or scraps. And so here's a version of it in the jelly roll, and that's what I made on the episode. But what I want to show you is how cool it looks in scraps. So this is Joni's quilt she made out of scraps, and I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So if you're interested in checking out that video, you should. It's pretty fun. All right, now let's talk about our main topic, the business of longarm quilting or business of machine quilting. So what I want to do is not tell anybody how you should do anything. I'm just going to tell you about all the mistakes I made and how it still ended up okay, and so hopefully give you a little bit of reassurance there. So nobody well, I did not really set out to be a machine quilter or a quilter in general. It's not like you can necessarily take that class in high school, or you go to your career guidance counselor and like, oh yeah, you should be a speaker, teacher, and a quilter, because it just doesn't work out that way. I had no idea what quilting really was, and I wasn't ever crafty as a child. Well, I mean, like, crafty in a constructive way. I was crafty in a different way. But I wasn't into any of that or had any idea of it. It wasn't until I met my husband's grandpa that I learned how to quilt. And so if you've watched any of my live chats, you might have heard of this. My husband's grandpa taught me how to make quilts, and he is the biggest influence on me to become a machine quilter, which is kind of ironic because he never machine quilted a day in his life. But he is definitely the main driving force behind that. So let me set the stage for you. I come into this family. I'm dating this guy. He's very attractive. I'm trying to get him to propose. Good news, he does. I got him. But his grandpa and grandma, they made quilts to give away at family reunions. So this was kind of their thing. So here you can see some pictures from a couple of our reunions. I won't go into details with the story of it, but just know it's very regimented. There is rules, and you follow the rules. So to win a quilt, you have to be, like, they make a quilt for every generation, and you have to show up, and then they have a young marrieds quilt, and you can only win a quilt once. It's a whole thing. So the very first reunion that I went to with my boyfriend at the time, I see these quilts hanging up, and they're giving them away. And if you've ever been to, like, I don't know, some kind of gathering where people get upset over, like, potato salad, right, or something little, just imagine what happens when you throw quilts in the mix, right? So there I am, my first reunion. They're handing away the quilts, and some people were upset about such and such had already got one, or maybe they hadn't. I'm not going to go into detail because I live too close to home. They're around me. I don't want to get in trouble. But I remember sitting there, that first reunion, watching these people fight or get into this argument about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, geez, they're just blankets. Okay, so this is why I'm so glad it's through the camera, because I'm sure some of you are like, what? I'm showing you my level of ignorance, right? If I'm calling them blankets, it's like I don't really know what they are, but obviously people want them. So I decided, maybe I should make a quilt. Maybe if I make a quilt, I can get Jeremy to propose. That's about how deep and profound I was thinking at the time, right? And so these pictures, you can see Grandpa in the top right there. The quilts are always set out, and everybody can look at them, and then they give them away. And at the bottom left is Drake, my son, who is now 18. I think that's crazy, but that's the quilt he won. So he won his generation's quilt already. So very cute, right? So this is a thing. I tell Grandpa, will you show me how to make a quilt? I'm going to make Jeremy a quilt. And so he did. So this was the first quilt that we made, and he was such a good teacher. Oh my gosh. And I won't go into too much detail. I don't have hours to talk, but when I went over to his house the first time, again, remember, I have nothing. I haven't sewn since 8th grade home ec, and it was not good. We decided to make a 9-patch because that would be the best way to start. And so he traced out a template for me, a 4.5-inch square out of cardboard, and had me trace all the squares of fabric, cut them out with scissors, and make my 9-patch. So like 2 hours later, I have my block finished. And he said, oh, that's great. Now let me show you the easy way. And then he got out the rotary cutter and the ruler. Thank goodness, because I probably would not be a quilter if I had to cut that out all by scissors. But he was always a trickster, always joking, always so much full of fun. So that was the first quilt, and that quilt is still on our bed to this day. So I think my color tastes have evolved since then, just so you know. But, you can never go wrong with old Americana and green, I guess. So that's the first quilt I ever did. And because you're joining me for a live chat, you like quilts. You either like it or you love it, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. Grandpa became my quilting buddy. I would go over to his house, we'd work together, and then I wanted to start working on it home, so I stole half of his supplies, like you do. He was totally fine with it, and we made several quilts together. Now, Grandpa was actually a hand quilter, so he didn't machine quilt. He hand quilted, and here's a picture of my basement when we were working on the second quilt I ever made. So that was the second one. It was huge, and then we were getting ready to hand quilt it. So lots of fun, right? This is my only experience with quilts. I'm loving it. Grandpa is like the best teacher, and we're just having fun. But there's a problem, because I would hand quilt in between him and Jeremy. Jeremy grew up with quilting in his family. He knew what this was about. So we would sit there and hand quilt the quilts, and I was not good. They were great. Here's Grandpa, here's Jeremy, and here's me, just like one at a time. But here's the thing, I don't have to be good at something to enjoy it. I don't mind looking silly or little silly, which is good because that definitely helps me out. But they were definitely way better than I was. And it wasn't like it was Grandpa's fault. I mean, he was a good teacher. He tried to share, tips. In fact, one idea he gave me was when you're hand quilting, if you need to go to another line of quilting, you don't have to break thread or cut off. You could just go through the layers of the quilt and come up on the other side. Perfect, right? Makes sense. Except I didn't hear through the layers of the quilt. I went underneath, over, and then came up. So I had some stitches that were like this big. So you can see now why when I'm machine quilting, I'm like, stitch length doesn't matter. If you can't get your foot stuck in it when you pull the quilt over you, you're fine. So it wasn't the best experience. But we hand quilted those first several quilts, and it was a lot of fun. And then one day, Grandpa said, you should come over and have pizza. And that was always meant something fun was going to happen. So we go over, and he was sitting in his rocker chair, and he was like, I've been thinking. And that's when you knew something good was going to happen, for sure. He said, I've been thinking you should get a longarm quilting machine. So that's kind of how that all came about. And I said, well, I think I should too. What is it? And he goes, well, I don't know. I saw one at a quilt show one time, and I have some information coming. So that's about the depth of the talk there. Now, this is 18 years ago, right? This is before a lot of the online stuff. And Jeremy has this great talent that he can tell how expensive something is by the name of it. So he was like, I don't know about this longarm machine. But Grandpa had already ordered information, and we were going to come back as soon as information came in and look at it, which it did a few days later. All this is over. We look at it. We're looking at this brochure. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what is this stuff I'm seeing? But then I noticed that they forgot to put prices in the brochure. Right. Well, right? If the price isn't in the brochure, what does that mean? It means you probably can't afford it. But I was undeterred. I can be tenacious. So I called up the company and I said, hi, I would like to buy a longarm. I was wondering how much they are. So then they told me, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's like a child's college fund. Whew, well, maybe I could just not send my kids to college. No, I'm just kidding. But I got off the phone and I told Jeremy and Grandpa, I said, okay, so here's the deal. This is how much they are, but let me tell you how much I can save on a used one. They told me they had a used one that was only like half a college education, so perfect. And Jeremy's like, nah. Okay, I've never machine quilted, right? And Grandpa said, if you don't buy that girl a longarm, I'm going to buy it for her. So that's how I got a longarm. So if you're trying to get a longarm, get your spouse's grandparent to coerce them into getting it for you. And Jeremy said no, he would get it for me. Everybody always wanted to make Grandpa really happy. So I got a longarm. It was great. So we waited those days that, you buy the longarm, you wait for it to get delivered. Grandpa's excited. I'm excited. But here's the problem. If you get a longarm, you should know, you should look at several. I mean, you should make sure you have a great dealer in the area, right? You should probably know how it works. This is true, right? So here's the blind squirrel, right? Here I am. I don't know what I'm doing. So Grandpa and I discussed this, and we decide that it must be self-driven or computerized, which is probably the funniest joke of the whole story. Obviously, it's not computerized, but I had no idea that I would have to actually move it around. Like, I thought maybe there was something that it drove in and just kind of moved it over back and forth. So can you just imagine the delivery day comes, right? And so the guy is setting up the machine, and he asked me, what side of the machine do you want to quilt from? Grandpa's there. Jeremy's there. He's already, said I can't stop using this in a year. I gotta use it. Can't stop. And I was like, I'll tell you what side I want to work from. I want to work from that side. And I just pointed to one of the sides. So that is about the scariest moment I've ever had, because I was thinking, I've just spent this much money on a machine, and now I have to actually, hold on a second, drive it, and I had not ever machine quilted up to that point. Now, this is where I kind of like to interject, because sometimes people say, well, why didn't you quilt on your sewing machine? Well, have a great reason for that. We didn't know that you could. So Grandpa had learned how to quilt from his mom, who'd made quilts back in the Depression. And then he picked up quilting after he retired. So he wasn't a part of a guild or a group. He didn't know you could, and I knew even less than Grandpa. So we didn't know you could quilt on a sewing machine. And I thank God every day that we didn't know that, because I don't think Jeremy would have bought me that long arm if he knew I could do it with my sewing machine. But he did, and I got it, and here's me working on it. So that hand quilting frame had to move out so I can move in the machine, and I started to learn how to quilt. So at this point, I'm kind of freaking out, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to learn how to use this. I gotta figure out what I'm doing. And so I just loaded some quilts and I started. So you can see here, loading quilts. Now, that sounds brave, don't you think? Like, oh my gosh, that's so brave of her. It wasn't really that brave. Grandpa bought quilt tops everywhere he went, every garage sale, thrift store, anything. And so he had like 30 tops, and they were very special. I mean, like hand-pieced, double knit. Like, ugh, these things were, I wasn't going to ruin them with the quilting, so I wasn't super worried about it. So I just loaded those quilts and I learned a lot. I learned so much. For instance, did you know that if there's a hole in the quilt top, you can quilt your machine into it, and it is really hard to get it out? That's a true fact. Or I learned if there's a bulky seam from all that hand-pieced fabric or that double knit, that it can break your needle and then it'll freak you out, but the needle will still quilt until you turn off the machine and jab through the quilt, and then you peed your pants. It's just, I mean, hypothetically, of course. But most importantly, I learned that you can make your quilt back too small for your quilt top. It's a true fact. And you don't realize it till you get to the end. Now, this is really before any social media and before videos. And so I'm like, crap, I don't know what to do. So I took it to Grandpa, I gave it to him, I said, only thing I could do, I had to chop off the last border. Here you go. Here's your quilt top with 3 borders. And he was like, that looks fine. We'll put that part under the pillow. So he was always he said I was the best machine quilter he knew. So it was great. I didn't know what I was doing. He liked it. It was fantastic. And, you know, I think I probably could have learned a lot quicker if I'd had more resources like there are today. But I wouldn't probably have enjoyed it as much. I think sometimes when we're so busy comparing ourselves to what other people are doing, we can lose that joy of learning. And I mean, I was a blind squirrel, and I was having fun with my quilting. I knew it wasn't great, but every time I could be like, ooh, that doesn't look as crappy as it did last time. And so it was definitely a learning process. And Grandpa, you know, he totally let me just quilt through his quilts. And then after I was done with all 30 of them, I decided maybe it was time to, you know, quilt my own or take other quilts. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But I want to show you the progression just so you can see how far I've come. And I don't show you this stuff so you're like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I mean, it's rustic, Angela, for sure. But it's always a progress, right? Every master was once a disaster. Everybody started out as a new quilter or new in some creative thing. So don't think like, oh, I could never do it, because trust me, if I can do it, I think anybody can do it. So I started out with the pantographs, which is what you saw me doing on that long arm. There's that sweet heart that I took, and I think I showed this in my Help How Do I Quilt It or Trunk Show live chat, but this is one of those quilts that Grandpa had, so, you know, it's lovely. It's lovely, and I guess I thought the hearts would complement the curves of the piecing. I don't know. And I loved it so much, I took a picture off the back too, so you could see it. So Grandpa, even though he was a hand quilter, he did love the back of the quilts. He wanted to see the quilting, so it was always fun. But then my skills began to improve, right? So I finally learned. Now there's a lot of trial and error between these pictures, just so you know. It's not like I got it, I sucked, and then I was good, right? It was like I got it, I sucked less and less and less, and got better and better and better, and then I was okay. But this is one of the first ones I thought, oh my gosh, I can kind of do this, right? I don't know if they're swirls or paisleys or a combination of the two. Not sure what was going on there, but I liked it enough to take a picture of it and print it out. So it was kind of nice. But another example of some of the quilts that Grandpa gave me. And then I got super fancy, and I could do little waves and some stitching in the ditch, right? Now that was a whole nother life lesson to learn, stitching in the ditch. I was not good at that, but I wanted to be. So there we go. I kept moving on. So that's kind of the progression that I had with with the machine and everything. And so I'm going to just pause right here from pictures and just talk about the next portion, right? So I'm quilting, machine quilting, and I love it. I love it. It's like it was meant for me because I'm not a perfectionist. I'm a people pleaser. It's a totally different neurosis. And I really love the machine quilting even more than the piecing. And I loved showing Grandpa the next quilt I had finished. And after I quilted his quilts, and I quilted a few that I had, and then I started making quilts for in-laws, I thought, man, I could either make more quilts or I could start quilting for customers. And I decided to start quilting for customers, right? So that is about how deep that thought was, right? Like, I like quilting, I don't like piecing. If I quilt for customers, maybe I can make a little money and just get to do what I love to do and do that favorite part. And so I did. Now, when I go up and tell Jeremy, I come to this decision, I said, Jeremy, I've been thinking. That did not bring the same response as when Grandpa would say it. That usually scares him when I say that. I said, I've been thinking about quilting for customers, even though that was never the plan. That was never the reason we bought the machine. It was always to quilt my own stuff. And he's like, whatever. So I went on to askjeeves.com. Does anybody remember that? Like before Google. And I asked Jeeves what I should do to be a professional quilter. And Jeeves said, I'm sure, in an accent, that I should join a local guild. Perfect, right? I'll join a guild and I'll get to be around other quilters. And I guess I didn't even really realize there were guilds, but now I do. And that was a lot of fun. So going to my first guild meetings, I was 23, 24 at the time. It was just a couple years ago. So young, but they really surrounded me and gave me, encouragement. They were just great. And so I'm at my first meeting and they're like talking about their quilt show. Never been to one. Thinking this sounds like fun. And they asked if anybody wanted to be a vendor at their show. So by now, you know how the story goes, right? I have no problem jumping into stuff and figuring out. So I'm like, I will be a vendor. I'll vend myself. I will promote my machine quilting skills. Perfect. Gave my $50 and here comes the show and there is my booth. Long story short, I had one table, one quilt, and a stack of cards at a quilt show, which I'm like looking around at everybody else setting up their booths. I'm like, ooh, this is not probably what I should have done, but oh well. It was funny because I was handing out cards and people would walk by and I was literally like that little girl selling lemonade. Right? They were like, just take her card. You don't have to actually have her quilt it. Like just be nice. Look how cute she is sitting there. But you try things and you don't always know they work. That's the main point of this sport. You try something. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If you try it and it works, great. You can build off of that. But I did hand out a ton of cards, and would you believe it? I got one call out of that. So a couple months later, I get a call from a lady named Kathy, who is opening a quilt shop, and she wants to know if I could quilt her samples. Now, here's a great thing about Kathy. She wasn't really a quilter yet, so I knew more than she did. Yay! And I started quilting her samples. And then plus, at this time, other guild members would start sending me their quilts. And so I was quilting for guild members, and I was quilting for the shop, and it's about an hour away from me, and I would quilt for their customers, and it was just so much fun. I mean, there's something about the machine quilting process, and I know that doing it professionally is not for everybody, but for me, being a people pleaser, when I could take their quilt and then hand it back to them and they're loving it, I mean, that's just like the best. I just loved it. And I loved working on other people's quilts and seeing things that I would never make for good or bad. It was just really fun. And so, I mean, that went on for several years. I would say probably 7 or 8 years. I'm quilting for customers, I'm having babies, they're growing big. And honestly, to this day, I probably would still be in my basement quilting for my customers, loving every minute of it if it hadn't been for 2 things that happened pretty simultaneously, right about the same time. And so those 2 things were really what kind of gave me my break or helped me take it to the next level. So first of all, let's go back to our pictures. Quilting for Tula Pink. So those of you, people were chatting about Tula Pink's live chat or live video video chat that she did on Instagram. I was on it with her and it was just so much fun. Quilting for Tula has definitely been such a fun thing. I mean, that's been going on for almost 13 years now, 13 years. Yeah, a long time. She makes quilts that I never, would ever get to quilt. And she trusts me and it's a lot of fun. And so how that came about is, do you remember that here I am at my guild show and I'm out of place with my table and I'm vending, and one person calls me. It was Kathy. Well, Kathy calls me 7 or 8 years later and says, hey, would you like to quilt for my daughter? She's a fabric designer. Her name is Tula Pink. And so that is how I got hooked up with Tula. I'd already been quilting for her mom, and Tula had just moved back to Missouri from Texas. So everything can seem like it's so wrong, but then it goes okay, right? So even though that one show seemed so silly and I didn't handle it right, but one person called in, and it was Kathy, and I built up my business. And then by the time I started quilting for Tula, it was just great, right? So let that be an encouragement right there. Sometimes things seem like they don't work out, but it really is leading up to something bigger. But what's funny about all this is, so, Tula's awesome fabric designer. This is us at the first market. I went with her for her Parisville line. I mean, she's done phenomenally. I've been having so much fun. And one time we were at Quilt Market and at the hotel bar drinking water. It was good water, really good water. And Kathy and Tula and I were all talking, and we're super happy because, lots of water. And Kathy was like, I can't believe, look at how far we've come. And Tula and I were so excited. And I said, oh, I just can't believe it came from that one show, right? That one guild show that I did back in the day. And she goes, I know, I still think about that. I just thought it was so cool how you were demonstrating on your long arm in your booth. And I'm like, man, this water is great. Because I said, no, Kathy, I didn't have a long arm in my booth. She said, no, you did. I thought it was really crazy how you got that big long arm in there and you were demonstrating on it. And I'm like, Kathy, that was not me. And she goes, oh, I called the wrong person. So even a blind squirrel gets a nut sometimes. She didn't mean to call me, but she did. And in that moment, my whole quilting career with Tula flashed before my eyes. But I was like, well, now you can't leave me now. So, sometimes a little bit of a break will help you out there too. So we kind of joke about how a wrong call led to that, but definitely so much fun. So that really was when I saw that quilts could be something that you could do more with the quilting, right? You could really add detail, like the Parisville panels that are behind us. A lot of detail, so much fun. And then right about the same time, I was invited to the very first meeting of the Kansas City Modern Quilt Guild. So, that's been 10 years ago, I think. And that was here in Kansas City. And I go there, I don't know what modern quilting is. I didn't even know people had blogs. And at this point, blogging is a thing. Nobody told me. I hadn't got the memo. And I went to that first meeting, and I remember seeing these quilts, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, these are amazing. You don't have to turn the quilt over to see the quilting. Because up to that point, I've been quilting for my very traditional guild, which I love all quilts. I love them all, trust me. But it was like a different thing. And so I remember looking at it and thinking like, oh my gosh, what could I do with some of these quilts? And so, the modern quilts that came through were unlike anything I'd ever seen, right? And people I would quilt for would talk about things like negative space. I would have meetings with Jackie Gehring. I quilted for some of her quilts, and I'd have to write stuff down and go home and Google it because I'm like, I don't know what negative space is, but I'm like, oh yeah, the quilting will definitely enhance the negative space. Then I had to go figure out what that was, and then I made it happen. But larger areas to quilt, and just having a lot of fun in that moment, watching the modern movement rise, and then also kind of enjoying my growth in that as well. And that's really when I realized that not everybody loved machine quilting as much as I do. I know, it's super shocking, right? It's like machine quilting is the best part. But I would go and start teaching classes, and people were acting like they were punished, like that was their punishment to be here. And I'm like, oh guys, no, machine quilting your quilt is not the punishment for finishing the top. Binding is the punishment for finishing your quilt. Okay, I'm only half serious. I don't really like binding, but still. And I realized that some people would talk to themselves in ways that I would never let anybody talk to me, like just really down on themselves. And I realized that's when maybe I could start teaching machine quilting. Maybe I had something to offer there. And I had Grandpa as the best example of how to be encouraging and just trying things and having fun with it. And so teaching quilting is something I love. I won't say more than machine quilting, but it's right up there. I think that's why these live chats are so nice, because I would normally travel about once a month and teach classes in a guild, and it's been a year since I've been teaching. So I'm just going to talk to a camera and hope you guys are listening. So anyway, dealing with quilts that were made with different substrates like linen and like voile or voile, however you say it, and then all the negative space, and really taking what I already knew and applying it to that area. And I kind of joke, at that point, I was bilingual, right? I was in the right place at the right time because I had been quilting long enough that I loved traditional quilts and I loved machine quilting, and I had the technical skill. But when this new thing started, I also loved the aesthetic of it, and I wanted to quilt those quilts too. So it's like I had the best of both worlds, and I could go to a traditional guild and talk about machine quilting, and I could go to a modern guild and talk about machine quilting, and it was great. And one thing I didn't think I needed to do, I didn't think I needed to come up with modern designs or different designs. I just took the designs I've always used and just used them in slightly different ways, right, in different areas of the quilt. And here's another little close-up of this one. And I cannot remember the name of it. I know I did it for Robert Kaufman, and I'm sorry that I can't remember who pieced it. This has been a long time ago. But one of my favorites, because it just shows how you can combine geometric and curve and contrast and really show off that beautiful ring of piecing. So, and then that just led to quilting and teaching, and it's kind of just evolved into now this thing that it's a whole business that supports my family. My husband works with me. It's crazy to think that it all came back from that first, reunion where I asked Grandpa to show me how to make a quilt. And I think what's important about that is to say, when I asked him how to make a quilt, he said yes. He didn't say, you have to make it with the fabric I want you to use, and you have to use the pattern that I think you should. I mean, he really let me be my own person. And so that was super important. And I think that's what's great about quilters. I think almost every quilter I've met is so willing to share and be generous with their time. Anyway, I won't go down that road. I'll get all gushy. But so quilting, my whole quilting business has evolved, right? It started quilting for customers, and it kind of went to teaching and writing, and now videos, and now editing, and now I'm using a switching program to do a live chat on YouTube. I think learning new stuff is just so much fun. Now, you have to know, though, throughout all those years, there's so many mistakes, but that's how you learn things, right? You try something, and if it works, it does, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. There's plenty of things that didn't work out over the years. I'm just not sharing them in this chat, right? I'm only sharing the stuff that did work out because, come on, that's the whole point of this, to be encouraging. But, when I was looking through the chat beforehand, there were some great questions, and I'll address those. But usually the best answer I would say is try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. Don't be afraid of the failure. Just use it as an opportunity to learn. And I know, that sounds so cheesy. I know it sounds cheesy. But just know from somebody that has failed a lot that sometime they're going to work. So, okay. A lot of questions that came up about the whole idea for quilting for customers. So now we're going to the actual bits of it, was about what to charge. Such a tricky subject because everybody depends on what you're offering. It depends on, how fast you can quilt. It just depends. So I can't really give you a good answer. And I know that's always the part when I do this lecture or when I do classes on this topic that people just want me to tell them that answer. Just tell me what to charge. I'm like, I can't tell you. I can tell you what I did and not to do what I did. So I looked and saw what everybody else was charging around me, and I decided to charge half. Big mistake. First quilts I did for customers were for 1/2 cent a square inch. That's a deep hole to try to dig yourself out of. Not only that, but think about the perception of what that is. You're automatically perceived as not being very good. So don't undercut people trying to get more customers, because 2 reasons. The customers you get might not be the ones that you want, and it's really hard to dig out of that hole. It's very, very hard because you can't really just triple your prices overnight. So it's always easier to lower your prices than it is to raise them, right? So look and see what other people are doing in your area, have a good estimate of the time it takes you, and then charge accordingly, even if you're new, right? Because you're still worth that. And if you want to run some deals, I know some people in the past have been like, ooh, can I do new quilter deals? You can run sales, but don't call it a new quilter sale. Call it a limited time sale, or do something, but don't make it sound like you're new. You have skills to give, and don't downplay yourself right off the beginning. I know that's what I did. I'd always say, well, I just got my long arm, and I really want to quilt for customers, and I need the experience, so I'm going to quilt yours for half price. It just isn't good, right? But if you want the practice and you're freaking out and you don't want to charge, friends are a great place to start. Friends, guild members, but treat it like it is a customer. And whether that's going through the whole process of the intake and the giving back and the charging, and we talked about this in the chat before we started, it'll just help you get that experience of what that looks like. And even if you're practicing with your friends, I think you should still charge something. whether it's a small amount of money, whether it's that jelly roll in their quilting room that you've been eyeing, something. You need to get used to the idea of swapping your skills for something. And, and Tucker Sewing also asked what price to charge by square inch. You have to decide how you want to charge. I always did mine by square inch because it was easy to figure out. It was easy to give them a cost right up front. And it was always hard for me to charge and say like, oh, this is what it costs. So it's easier to make it easy and just get it out of the way. If somebody came back, which did happen sometimes, oh, that's more than I wanted to spend, totally fine, I understand. Good luck, have fun with that. So that was a question that came up a lot, the price. You just have to kind of go and see where you're good. All right, another question that came up though was how to get the word out about your business, right? So you've decided you're gonna quilt for customers, you're gonna get the word out, you're gonna have, you're gonna start telling people, well, you have to get the word out. So some people are like, I don't know what to do. We'll start talking about it. And now you have resources like social media. You can quilt for people that aren't just in your neighborhood. You can quilt for people everywhere. So you need to start talking about it. Start telling your friends. Start telling your quilters. Before COVID, I would say bring show and tell and show at your guild what you're doing. But the more that you're putting it out there, the more things will come back. And I know that in the beginning it's going to be scary. First of all, it's super scary to say, I'm doing this and putting yourself out there like that. But that's part of it. It gets easier, but it's always scary. I think of every big thing that's happened since I started, from even launching the very first episode of Midnight Quilter. That was scary. Like, I'm putting myself out there and it's like, this is like, okay, here we go. Let's see if it's going to work or not. But you have to do it. And I know it's also hard to talk about it. So one thing, I have a group that I mentor, and one thing we talk about is don't talk about yourself, talk about how quilting makes you feel, right? So oh, I love quilting for customers because I love getting their feedback when they're so happy with their quilt. I love putting my layer of my art on their quilt. So think of it that way. But also just talking about it. And I promise that once you get that snowball rolling, it takes a little bit, right? You get one person, and then maybe you get a second, and then it grows like a tree. So you have to put yourself out there and just know that it's going to take a minute, but it will definitely start rolling pretty fast. Honestly, I tell my long arm owners, once you have people that you have a long arm, they're going to usually start asking, ooh, I have quilts. Do you want to quilt them for me? So it might not be as hard as you think if you just start talking about it. Again, you just have to get used to that. I know it can be scary. Try to find other business people that are in the same area as you and meet with them and be an encouragement for each other. I think that's always been something I've wanted, and I love that in my group. So try to cheer each other on. Or I love how it says practicing on charity quilts. So this is more like if you want to practice your skills to get to where you feel comfortable quilting for customers. But once you feel comfortable, then you can kind of go on from there. Okay, this is great, Stephanie. I love this. She says, it's funny because you appear so comfortable in front of the camera. You're natural. I never thought you looked nervous when you started Midnight Quilter. Okay. That's so perfect, right? Because when I first did the midnight classes for Craftsy way back in the day, I am not a shy person at all. I will talk to anybody. In person is the way for me. I love it. And so when they came to do the class for the very first time, they start rolling that camera and I'm like, I don't know what to say. It's like that once that camera goes on, you get scared. And I was so sure that first night they were going to cancel the whole class. I was like, I told Jeremy that was bad, really bad. But I realized, okay, if something is hard, you have two choices, right? You can lean into it or you can avoid it. And both of them are fine. It's okay to avoid stuff you don't like. I don't like binding. I avoid it. That's okay. But I knew I was uncomfortable on camera and I could either lean into it or avoid it, and I leaned into it. I took every camera thing I could get, any interview on camera. I even emailed the local talk show in Kansas City, and I appeared on there a couple times for free doing tutorials because I wanted experience in front of the camera. And that ultimately is what makes me look comfortable, is because I'm used to it now. And then that is ultimately what landed the Midnight Quilt Show for me. The people that produced that first Craftsy, they had a group of names they were talking about, and they said they picked me because I was so comfortable on camera. So if I look natural, it's just because it takes practice. So that's the thing I want you to know. It's not a talent. It's not like an inborn talent. It's a skill. So it takes practice, just like any creative thing, right? I am trying to learn how to make royal icing cookies, and oh my gosh, it's really hard to get that icing smooth all the way around the outside. but I'm going to figure it out. So anyway, I'm glad it looks natural. It's just practice. And yes, I have leaned in. I have read that book. It's so good. And Dan, I don't think you're the only guy here. A lot of guys quilt, and I like to say that Grandpa was the original man quilter. So very fun. You can always check these live chats out afterwards too. So I'm kind of looking both sides. I get easily distracted. Anyway, so if you're wanting to quilt for customers, I think it's a great profitable thing to do. It allowed me to have a business when I still had children at home and I could work from home. And it was a lot of fun. It really fulfilled me. And it was really about that. I never had, I'm trying to think how to say this because I don't want to sound cheesy because I know it sounds so trite. I didn't have business experience. I didn't know stuff, but I wanted to learn. And so even to this day, I listen to podcasts and great courses about business strategy, learning, and I think it's a great thing to do. And as long as you're working hard and you're learning, I think you can't help but be successful. And the great thing about quilters is we are loyal. Once you have your long arm quilter, and those of you that have one know what I'm talking about, you're like, I am so loyal. It's like a hairstylist, right? I will drive an hour to get my hair cut because I know the gal is good with my hair. So if it's something that you think you might want to do for a business, it is such a fulfilling thing. And if it isn't, perfect. I talk to long arm owners too, and I'm like, that's great. You want to quilt for yourself? I think that's awesome. You do that. But if there's anything that you want to, you should try it out. I think it could be fun. Mindy, I'm so glad you came. Okay, so let's talk about practical questions. This is a great question, Becca. My friend wants 2 quilt tops quilted together, one for each side. Any recommendations? I do not like trying to do that on a long arm because it's very, very hard to center the quilt. So on the back, you're not sure exactly how much stuff is going to shift, and you need space on each side. So I usually tell people that want something like that I can't guarantee that it'll be centered on the back, and I usually say I can only worry about one side. Which one do you want me to worry about? And I'll quilt with that one on the top. So it can be done, but as long as you're managing their expectations and letting them know, like, okay, it's not going to be perfectly centered. It's more of a pretty back, but it's not going to be 2 pieces. So that's what I would say. Melody, I'm so happy you're here too. See if there's any questions about quilting for customers. I know that it's, like I said, it's a very specific topic, but I think it's so important to know that you can try things, and whatever it is, you can do it. Gosh, now I'm getting super cheesy. I need to stop. Okay, so just remember, every time you look at somebody that looks like they have it together, that every master was once a disaster, and sometimes even a blind squirrel gets a nut sometimes. So I'm going to glance over real quick and make sure there's not any other questions about this, and I'll be back next week for the live chat. We're going to get right back to the practicals. We're going to talk about troubleshooting tension problems, and we're going to talk about how to have the best quilting experience you can, because there's nothing more frustrating than when you finally work yourself up to actually quilt. You're like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then you get going and the thread breaks or shreds. And so I'll try to help talk you through that and give you some pointers. Either way, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all joining me for another live chat. I'm really enjoying this little bit of community that's coming, and I hope you can join me next week or any of the Thursdays for another live chat. If you like this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up, and I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, because when you subscribe, they'll send you a notification when I do go live. Okay, so everybody stay safe, stay warm. Cannot wait to be here next week after the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. Sorry, I was trying to keep it out of there, but I'm super excited. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next week.